Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into something profound. We're drawing on the wisdom gathered over a whole 40-year career.
Yeah, specifically looking at the work of Dr. Howie Knoff from Project Achieve Educational Solutions. He spent decades as a school psychologist, but also, and this is key, as an expert witness in federal court cases involving autism.
So this isn't just theory. It's grounded in some really high-stakes situations.
Exactly. And what Dr. Knoff brings to the table is this call for a pretty radical shift in how we see things. He talks about something he calls the mirror.
The mirror. Okay, tell me more.
Well, the core idea is this painful split. Students with autism often, they don't fully understand the neurotypical world they live in.
Right.
And just as importantly, we professionals, families, everyone often fail to truly grasp their internal world, their sensory reality.
So the mirror reflects both ways. We're not seeing them clearly, and they're struggling to see us clearly.
Precisely. It's a challenge for us to stop just focusing on what we think is wrong with the student and instead take a hard look at our own reflection, how we are interacting.
And to really feel the weight of that disconnect, that isolation. Maybe we should start with someone who's lived it. Dr. Knoff often brings up Naoki Higashida.
Yes, the nonverbal 13-year-old author. His words are just incredibly powerful. He wrote about feeling so frustrated, wanting to scream when he doesn't know what to do.
But even screaming doesn't help because nobody understands why.
Right. I want to explain, he says, but the words don't come out, so I end up doing something strange, and then people get angry.
Which just makes him feel even more alone. Wow.
That really captures it, doesn't it? Feeling trapped in a room with no doors. You can see out, but you can't get there, not on your own terms anyway.
So our mission today, then, is to try and internalize that feeling.
Yeah, to move beyond the usual checklist. Diagnosis, description, management. Those are important, but we need to get to a place of real empathy.
Compassion and maybe questioning some of our basic professional assumptions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Which leads to Dr. Knopf's core redefinition. He says autism isn't just a label or a list of behaviors.
Where's it then?
Fundamentally, it's a way of being in the world.
A different way of experiencing reality?
Okay. In those court cases he worked on, they kept showing the same thing over and over. Schools were trying desperately to figure out the behaviors they were seeing.
Or thought they were seeing.
Right. While the students themselves were just trying to navigate a world where, honestly, their senses might be betraying them or overwhelming them.
Which naturally leads to that goal shift you mentioned. The historical focus has often been, well, let's be honest, on managing behavior.
Yeah.
Getting kids to comply.
Control and compliance. But the call now, the urgent need, is to move past that, to actually try and understand that complex inner world, even when it's invisible to us.
So before we dive deeper into that, maybe just briefly ground us in the standard clinical picture.
Sure. So the DSM-5-TR, that's the diagnostic manual most clinicians use, it defines autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, as a neurodevelopmental condition.
Neurodevelopmental, meaning it originates in brain development.
Exactly. And it involves persistent differences in two main areas. First, challenges with social communication and interaction.
Okay, social stuff.
And second, restricted repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities.
Got it. Two main buckets. So let's take that first one, social communication. What does that look like in practice?
Well, you might see differences in nonverbal communication, like eye contact might be different, or gestures don't quite sync up with words.
Gary?
And a really common one is difficulty with what's called social-emotional reciprocity.
Reciprocity, like give and take.
Yeah, that natural back and forth in conversations, understanding social cues, sort of the ping pong of interaction. It might not flow as easily.
All right. And this is where things can go wrong for us, the observers.
This is where one of the biggest pitfalls lies. Dr. Knock flags this as the attribution error. It's a huge risk.
Attribution error, what does that mean?
It means we see a challenge, maybe a behavior or a difficulty, and we immediately jump to blaming the autism. We attribute it straight to the condition itself.
Without really digging deeper.
Exactly, without doing objective assessments to figure out the actual cause. We just label it autism behavior and kind of stop there.
So we might be missing the real reason for the behavior.
Totally. We have to figure out if the difficulty is maybe being caused by something external, like how other people are reacting to the student or the environment itself. Can you give an example of that? Absolutely. Dr. Knoff talks about cases involving students who've been, frankly, traumatized by things like physical restraints or being put in seclusion rooms at school.
Okay, that's serious trauma.
Right. Now, the initial behavior that maybe led to the restraint might have been related to their autism, maybe a sensory overload or something.
But the trauma afterwards is different.
Completely different. The experience of being restrained, the fear, the lack of control that can make the adults involved or even the room itself become independent emotional triggers.
So months later, if that student has a huge reaction when cornered by that same staff member or near that room,
We might mistakenly say, oh, that's the autism flaring up. But it's not. It's a trauma response. Any kid, autistic or not, might react that way after such an experience.
that's a massive distinction. We're potentially misinterpreting trauma as just part of the condition.
It's critical we don't do that, which leads directly to the second big point. We need a really comprehensive, objective history for every student.
Objective being the key word there.
Crucial. Taking that history without our own implicit biases coloring it. We have to consider other factors that could be playing a role.
Like what sort of factors?
Things like maybe there were complications at birth, or perhaps exposure to substances before birth. These things can cause cognitive challenges or learning difficulties too.
But they aren't part of the autism itself.
Exactly. They are separate, co-occurring factors. If we just assume autism explains everything, we create a flawed picture and, honestly, risk making really bad decisions about support and intervention.
It keeps coming back to that mirror, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Making sure what we're seeing is clear and not distorted by our own assumptions.
That's the core of it.
Okay, let's pivot then to that second clinical domain, the restricted and repetitive patterns. What falls under that?
So this includes things like stereotyped motor movements. You might see hand flapping, rocking, spinning.
Yeah.
These often serve really important self-regulatory functions.
Helping them manage sensory input or emotions.
Often, yes. And this domain also covers the sensory side directly being hyper-responsive, so extremely sensitive to sounds, lights, textures.
Or the opposite, hyporesponsive.
Right, maybe seeming indifferent to pain or temperature or needing really intense sensory input.
These sensory differences must have a huge impact on daily life.
Huge. But here's another potential pitfall. If these behaviors, especially the repetitive movements or sensory responses, are fundamentally internal, maybe neurobiological ways of coping, what happens when we try to apply our standard behavioral tools?
You mean like a functional behavioral assessment, an FBA?
Exactly. Dr. Knoff raises a major concern here, calling it the FBA dilemma.
Okay, refresh my memory. An FBA tries to figure out the function or purpose of a behavior, right? Like what the person is trying to get or avoid.
That's the goal, yes. Find the environmental trigger and the consequence that keeps the behavior going. Find its motivation.
But you're saying sometimes there isn't one. Not an external one, anyway.
That's the dilemma. We still actually know very little about the deep neurobiology, the physiology, the hormonal drivers behind many autism characteristics, especially when you consider all 8 sensory systems.
Wait, I thought there were 5.
We usually think of 5, but there's also proprioception, body awareness, vestibular balance movement, and critically interoception, that's sensing internal states like hunger, pain, needing the toilet.
Wow, okay. So much going on internally.
So the bottom line is some behaviors might just be biologically driven. They might be autonomic, happening automatically without conscious intent.
Like involuntary tics in Tourette syndrome. They just happen.
That's a great analogy Dr. Knoff uses. If a behavior is like that, purely autonomic, then doing an FBA to find its motivation or function is, well, it's pointless.
And potentially harmful.
Potentially very harmful. Because if the FBA process searches for an external reason and finds nothing, the conclusion might default to, well, they must be doing it on purpose.
Labeling the student as oppositional or defiant or manipulative when the behavior is actually outside their control.
It pathologizes something that might be a fundamental aspect of their neurobiology. And this connects directly to another really strong point Dr. Knoff makes
Which is?
about accountability, especially around bullying and victimization.
Oh, this is important. We know students with autism are sadly often targets.
Very often. Targeted by peers, sometimes even misunderstood or mistreated by adults. And Dr. Knoff is incredibly clear on this, attributing the reason for the bullying to the autistic student's lack of social skills is wrong.
How does he phrase it?
He calls it blaming the victim, plain and simple.
So the responsibility isn't on the autistic student to somehow magically develop skills to stop being bullied.
Absolutely not. The responsibility for the antisocial behavior, the bullying, the aggression, the exclusion lies 100% with the antagonist, the person doing it.
Whether that's a peer or an adult.
Yes. And the change required is unilateral. It's non-negotiable. The environment, the people in it, must change to ensure safety and respect.
That shifts the focus entirely. Instead of trying to fix the victim's social skills in that context, we address the aggressor's behavior directly.
The focus has to be on creating a safe, respectful environment, not on making the victim responsible for preventing the abuse.
Okay, so we've talked about understanding the behavior, avoiding attribution errors, and ensuring accountability. Now, how does this translate into practical support? You mentioned the DSM levels earlier.
Right. The DSM-5-TR outlines 3 support levels, level 1, level 2, and level 3. But it's so important to remember these are not fixed diagnoses like disease stages.
They're not permanent labels.
No. They describe the level of support needed at a particular time in a particular context, and those needs can change. Someone might need level 3 support in school, but maybe only level 1 at home, or vice versa. Needs fluctuate.
It's a really key clarification.
Okay.
Let's look at those levels, maybe starting with level 1. What does that typically involve?
Level 1 is often described as needing support. These individuals usually have fluent language, maybe strong cognitive skills. Dr. Knoff calls this the deceptive complexity of apparent competence.
Deceptive because on the surface, they might seem okay, but underneath.
Exactly. Underneath, there can be significant struggles. Things like that social reciprocity we talked about, maybe conversations become very one-sided, dominated by their specific interests.
Okay.
Big challenges often lie in pragmatic language, understanding idioms, sarcasm, reading between the lines, and huge ones in executive functioning.
Executive function, it's like the brain's manager, right? Planning, organizing, staying flexible.
That's a great way to put it, the internal CEO. So difficulty with flexible thinking, planning steps, organization, shifting tasks. These can be major hurdles, even if someone is very articulate.
And this can lead to something called masking.
Yes, especially, though not exclusively, seen in females. They develop these incredibly sophisticated strategies to camouflage their difficulties.
Like what?
Social mimicry, copying how others act. Using scripted responses in conversations, actively suppressing repetitive behaviors, or stimming.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. They pour enormous mental energy into just appearing neurotypical, which leaves very little capacity for actual learning or for coping when things inevitably go off script or the environment changes.
And it means they might not get identified or supported until much later, maybe until crisis point.
Precisely. That apparent competence masks the need.
Okay, so that's level 1. What about level 2? You mentioned that requires substantial support.
Right. Level 2 signifies a need for more substantial support. The social communication differences are more obvious across different situations. The restricted or repetitive behaviors are frequent enough to interfere with functioning more broadly.
So the challenges are more visible.
Generally, yes. There's often marked distress when routines change or difficulty shifting focus. Coping with change is harder. The support needs are clearer and required more consistently across environments compared to level 1.
Got it. More visible need, more substantial support required.
Yeah.
Now, contrast that with level 3. This requires very substantial support. Dr. Knoff calls this the deceptive complexity of apparent incompetence.
Another powerful phrase. Here, the communication barriers are often severe, maybe minimal verbal language, but the deceptive part is crucial. We absolutely cannot assume that this lack of expressive communication equals a lack of inner thought, feeling, or competence.
We risk overlooking their actual abilities and inner life because the communication barrier is so high.
Exactly. We have to look beyond the surface. Often, what looks like challenging behavior, maybe aggression, self-injury, or complete withdrawal, is actually communication.
Behavioral communication, what are they trying to say?
They're often trying to convey pain, overwhelming sensory input, frustration, confusion, unmet needs, but they don't have a more functional way to express it yet. So a key intervention is functional communication training, teaching them alternative ways to get their needs met.
Makes sense. What else is critical for understanding level 3 support needs?
Processing time is huge. Their receptive language, what they understand, might be much stronger than their expressive language, what they can say or sign. But they often need significant extra time to process what's been said or asked.
How much time are we talking?
It varies hugely, but you might need to wait 10 seconds, 30 seconds, maybe even longer in silence for them to process and formulate a response. We tend to jump in way too quickly.
And sensory processing?
Also critical, many individuals needing level 3 support might need single-channel processing, meaning don't talk while showing them something visually while also touching their arm. That's too much input at once, one channel at a time.
Despite these really significant challenges, though, Dr. Knoff points out they still show social awareness.
Absolutely. You see things like proximity seeking, wanting to be near trusted people, emotional contagion picking up on the feelings of others, even clear empathetic responses like comforting someone who is upset. That complex inner social and emotional world is there. We must never dismiss it.
So across all these levels, what's the guiding principle for providing the right support?
It really comes down to Dr. Knopf's fifth key insight, which is basically the blueprint: know thy student.
Simple but profound.
It means support has to be highly individualized. Yes, structure and predictability are usually essential, but the specifics must be tailored to that unique student's profile.
Their strengths, their specific triggers, their sensory needs.
All of it. You have to become an expert observer and analyst of that one individual. It requires continuous, controlled experimentation.
Can you give an example of that tailoring?
Sure. Think about communication training again. Using multiple methods at once. Pictures, gestures, spoken words. Maybe a device could be fantastic for a student who is sensory seeking and thrives on lots of input.
Okay.
But that exact same multimodal approach could instantly overwhelm and shut down a student who is hyper-responsive to sensory input and needs things presented one at a time.
So there's no one-size-fits-all autism intervention.
Absolutely not. The blueprint has to be drawn specifically for each person, and it needs to be constantly reviewed and adjusted based on how they respond.
So wrapping this all up, what's the fundamental shift we need to make based on these insights?
I think it boils down to a few key things. First, move away from purely deficit-based thinking. See the differences, yes, but also the strengths and the unique perspective.
Okay.
Second, reframe challenging behaviors. See them primarily as communication, often born out of distress or unmet needs, requiring a therapeutic, supportive response, not just a disciplinary one.
Stop just trying to manage or extinguish the behavior and start trying to understand the message.
Exactly. Third, we need to minimize the pressure and the effort spent trying to make autistic individuals appear neurotypical, especially when it comes at great personal cost to them, like with masking.
Prioritize their well-being over superficial conformity.
Yes. Which leads to the fourth point. Prioritize their dignity, their autonomy, and accommodating their sensory needs over simply achieving compliance.
So the ultimate goal isn't necessarily to make autistic students indistinguishable from their peers.
No, I don't think it is. The goal, really, is to create environments, schools, workplaces, communities, where every form of human neurodiversity isn't just tolerated, but is genuinely welcomed, understood, and even celebrated.
Where we adapt the environment to the person, not just force the person to adapt to an often unsuitable environment.
That's the heart of it. We need to stop expecting them to constantly translate themselves for us. We need to put in the effort to learn their languages.
Which brings us perfectly to that final provocative thought for our listeners.
Yeah, think about that mirror again. Dr. Knoff challenges us. If our autistic students, colleagues, family members are essentially waiting for us to learn their languages, what are we doing?
What are we holding on to?
Right. What policies in our schools or workplaces? What interaction styles we use? What environmental setups are we rigidly clinging to? Things that prioritize convenience or uniformity or just the way it's always been done.
Over-recognizing and responding to diverse, authentic forms of communication and being.
Exactly. What silent messages, what needs, what potential are we still failing to process simply because the messenger doesn't communicate in the exact way we expect or demand?
That's a powerful question to sit with, a real challenge to look in that mirror. This has been incredibly insightful. Thank you for guiding us through this deep dive.
It was my pleasure. It's crucial work to consider.